Today, the Insider Exclusive goes behind the headlines to investigate a legal case against the Lincoln Prairie Behavioral Institute in American Disabilities Rights, Veronica Martinez's story, and examine in depth how Richard Stiegel, partner Nicora and Stiegel, is representing Veronica Martinez in a classic violation of the American Disabilities Act, also known as the ADA. The American Disabilities Act prohibits discrimination on the basis of disability in employment, state and local government public accommodations, commercial facilities, transportation, and telecommunications, and was signed into law in 1990 by President George H.W. Bush. To be protected by the ADA, one must have a disability or have a relationship or an association with an individual with a disability. An individual with a disability is defined by the ADA as a person who has a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities, including a person who has a history or record of such an impairment, or a person who is perceived by others as having such an impairment. Veronica Martinez worked as an experienced clinical nurse manager, supervising 4 RNs, 3 LPNs, and 5 technicians at the Lincoln Prairie Behavioral Institute, a hospital for pediatric psychiatric patients in Springfield, Illinois. Veronica suffered a serious medical condition which required medical treatment, time off, and reduced workload, all of which were reported to her supervisor. As her condition worsened, Veronica also requested a job to a less stressful and available position at Lincoln Prairie, not once, but twice, under the ADA guidelines. Both times, her supervisor refused to transfer her and eventually fired her for insubordination. No one wanted this lawsuit, but the law is the law. The American Disabilities Act provides that employees are all protected under the ADA and that your job is legally protected. It spells out how employers must accommodate all employees with any disability. It states very clearly that the focus is that if assistance can enable an employee to work and be a productive member of the workforce, they should be reasonably accommodated if it does not create a hardship. Veronica has a potentially life-threatening disability. So why is Veronica bringing this case? It's not for herself alone. She's fighting not just for her own rights, but for all disabled Americans so that they may be reasonably accommodated by their own respective employers. The Insider Exclusive is joining her cause because Veronica is a true American hero, just trying to do her job while she's fighting to deal with life on life's terms. And so is her lawyer, Richard Stiegel, who's trying to get justice for Veronica and any victims of disability discrimination. Richard has earned the highest respect from citizens and lawyers alike as one of the best trial lawyers in Peoria, in Illinois, and across the nation. Richard is driven to get justice for his clients, but more importantly, to make sure that all employees are guaranteed their full rights under the law. This is the Insider Exclusive, live from Peoria, Illinois. It is my great pleasure to introduce Rick Stiegel to the show. Welcome to the show, Rick.
Thank you, Steve.
Tell our audience a little bit about your firm. What kind of law do you practice?
I represent plaintiffs in federal civil rights, employment discrimination, railroad cases, and other types of complex litigation.
Always representing the individual and not the corporations.
Almost invariably.
Yeah. Why do you represent individuals rather than big corporations?
2 reasons. One is that you're just a cog, more like the puppet at the end of the string as a trial lawyer in a corporation, because they're controlling all of the decisions.
Yeah.
And secondly, I don't like to see little people get pushed around.
You've been a lawyer for probably a little over 30 years, and you've been with your partner about the same amount of time. 1980, is that correct?
Yes.
All right. When a person has a problem, there's a lot of law firms to choose from. What makes your law firm the best choice over a major law firm?
We do not have a large volume of cases. We never wanted to, because then you're just pushing it through the system. Yeah. And so we know each individual case. My partner does more basic automobile, personal injury, some malpractice. I went into the more complicated areas of the law, and you have to think. And you need time to think. And if you're running a practice, and they do a very good job for personal injury, automobile cases that got huge volume, I mean, they do a good job, but you can't think about each case like you can mine.
Yeah, today we are here discussing the case of Veronica Martinez. Tell our audience a little bit about who Veronica is.
Veronica grew up in the worst projects of Dallas, Texas. And drug use was surrounding everywhere, and somehow she avoided addiction. She had a child, and the husband had substance abuser, and she had substance abuse history in her family. Her mother-in-law of the husband, her first husband, who she was divorced, is basically her mother figure, and she helped lead her out.
And she moved from Dallas up to Illinois, correct?
Yes, she got totally away. She came to Springfield, Illinois. She attended University of Illinois at Springfield, has a bachelor's degree, and she is a psychiatric nurse.
Yeah, and a psychiatric nurse is kind of a real specialty, isn't it?
Yeah, you got to deal with the most difficult people, the mental problems,
right.
And they deal with, the particular case involves a hospital who's dealing with psychiatric patients who were children.
This is Lincoln Prairie Behavioral Institute, correct?
Yes.
And tell our audience what happened while she was in employment there.
The drugs now for depression since 1992, people have probably heard of Prozac, are very good.
Yeah.
So usually those work. But they still use a method that goes back to the 40s and 50s and is thought of as inhumane unjustly. What they do is they give you electrical shocks.
And she's had to get some of that therapy, right?
Yeah, she had 3 sessions of that, and what it does is the nerve transmissions in your brain slow down, and usually a Prozac type drug will help. A chemical reaction will speed back up.
Yeah, so she suffers from elevated levels of anxiety and severe insomnia, right?
Yes, depression.
Yeah, but she's still a very good worker. From my understanding, she supervises, is it 4 nurses? She was supervising, she was managing 12 people.
Yeah, she had that in February.
Yeah.
She came back in June. And she's working in a psychiatric hospital. Yeah. Certainly they know how serious it is if you go to depression. Requires electroconvulsive therapy.
You have a case of a professional who takes time off because she has a medical condition, comes back to work, right?
Right.
And is authorized to take the time off, obviously, because she's letting her employer know. They welcome her back. What happens then?
She was on call at nights. During her 7 to 8 hour shift, she could handle that. But she couldn't handle being called all the time and having to go back to the hospital at all hours of the night. Mm-hmm. And they had one particular employee who was a recovering heroin addict. And basically, Veronica had to hold her hand and was constantly going back at night from home when she was supposed to be just monitoring things.
Mm-hmm. And she therefore sought a position which was open at the company, same employer, correct?
Yes.
That would require less stress.
Yeah, she would have had 8-hour days and not the supervision that was giving her so much problem.
Right. What happened when she went to her chief officer? I think her name was Renee Hale.
Well, of course, the other problem was at the beginning, Renee Hale and the other supervisor that held a position similar to Veronica, Renee Hale told her, well, myself and the other supervisor will really help you on those after-hours stuff.
Did they?
No, not at all.
So now she's stressed out again. She sees a job opening at the same employer, at the same place.
Right.
She requests it, but her supervisor turns her down not once, but twice, right?
Yes.
And for what reason?
Didn't give any.
She eventually was fired, right?
Yes.
For what reason?
It's important to tell the details. She had taken a sick day because of her insomnia, and it was a valid sick day. And the supervisor is texting her at home, asking her why she isn't at work. And she texts back, well, I'm working harder than you, what's your problem?
Yeah.
And she was fired because she was supposedly insubordinate.
Right. Now, she believes that she's been wrongfully terminated, correct?
Yes, properly so.
So you represent her in a wrongful termination, retaliation case, which is also an American Disabilities case, correct?
Yes, yes.
Explain to our audience what American Disabilities Act is.
What the Americans Disabilities Act was passed is we recognize that there are a lot of people who are disabled, about 40 million, I think Congress found, who were being shut out of the economy, and they could help us. It was bad for the disabled, it was bad for the economy, and it was basically an unseen, unexpressed bias. So they passed the Americans with Disabilities Act.
This is to allow employees to be productive, but maybe in positions where their disability makes it impossible for them to do that particular job, right?
No, what they're doing is someone who has something that can be reasonably accommodated. Obviously, a paraplegic cannot be an iron worker.
Yeah.
But if, for example, in Veronica's situation...
We have a medical situation.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, with Veronica's situation, it's easy. Transfer her to the other jobs so she doesn't have all the after-hours work.
Okay.
That's a reasonable accommodation. There are other cases, for example, a person had urinary tract problems and she was a receptionist. She needed a break every hour. She got fired because of that, and the court said, well, you got to give her the break.
Yeah. Now, the law requires employers to follow the ADA Act, right?
Yes.
And when they don't, then you file suit.
Right.
And in her case, Veronica's case, the suit is pending, correct?
Yes.
When is it supposed to be heard?
Oh, it's just now. We haven't had a scheduling conference yet, but when we had to sort out the corporate entities. One of the big problems today is you see these publicly traded corporations who have holding companies, operating companies, and all the subsidiaries fill pages of their public reports. You have to find the right people to get into the case. We got that resolved. And so now we'll have a scheduling order, and it takes usually about 1.5 years to resolve, to get a trial if you have a trial.
Right. Let's talk about the ADA, the American Disabilities Act, and what it means to have reasonable accommodations for all of our audience members out there who may be in a situation where they're working for a company, something comes up, they have to get another job, there's an opening. What are they entitled to do?
Well, one of the first things the Act does is it prohibits in the initial interviews asking anything about your disabilities because they don't want to exclude people. Although I think there's exceptions to that where companies are trying to accommodate them legitimately.
Yeah.
The EEOC has approved it. But basically they say that's off the books. You make your decision on hiring your initial interview, and then if you want to hire her, then you got to factor in whether the person can do the job.
Give us some examples of that.
One of the Veronica's situation, depression, anxiety is a classic example. Is she's going to need some. She can't have all these extra hours, and the pressure of the job with the after hours things were just too much.
Right.
So give her another position. Or she would have gone back to a floor nurse too.
Yeah.
But they refused both of those.
In cases like this, when you bring a case and you win it successfully, what is usually the result of a case like this?
Well, the result of almost every case is, it's a secret that people don't know, is 98% of all cases, criminal and civil, settle.
Right.
It went down to about 96, the whole system would grind to a halt. So usually they settle because there's too much risk of going to trial. But if they go to trial, you get your damages for her pain and suffering, which in this case is very real.
Right.
And
how is that determined?
A jury determines what it is.
Dollar-wise, how is it determined? Does it vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction?
Well, the discrimination caps, including statutes, including the ADA, have a cap from 100 to 200 to 300 on how many employees the company has. But the jury decides it. Mm-hmm. One of the interesting things is, who knows whether pain and suffering awards in these discrimination cases would be a problem, because there's no real data out there on how often juries return verdicts over these caps.
Right. In this day and age, do you get a lot of American Disability Act cases?
Regularly, yes.
Regularly?
Yes.
And what do they run the gamut of?
Depression's a big factor.
Yeah.
You can have somebody with a bad knee, needs surgery. Another person was a security officer at Bradley University here in Peoria, and had a very difficult tear of his rotator cuff, so he was off about a year and a half. And the chief is all over him to get back to work, and he can't.
Right. And generally, so people understand, someone comes to you as a lawyer. You write the company a letter before you file suit?
No, they set this up. They're all based on the race discrimination statute, Civil Rights Act of 1964, which incidentally we've done a good job with race. There's exceptions that are outrageous, but generally those are the fewer of the cases you see. Most of them are sex. And then
so you file suit right away?
Well, you have to file a charge with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission.
Do they have to investigate it first?
They are supposed to, but they have been underfunded and understaffed since the Clinton administration.
So I've heard of stories taking almost 1 year for them to get back to you.
If you ask them to do an investigation, but you can just say, give me a right to sue, and they'll terminate the case, and you have 90 days of that, receiving that letter in which to file your lawsuit.
Okay, and then what is usually a company's response when they get sued for violating the American Disabilities Act?
Well, it depends on who their management are.
Yeah.
Some are very good, and our system today still works well if both parties, the plaintiff and defendant, go into it as, hey, we got risks.
Yeah.
The defendant has got the expense of defending and a potential verdict and paying the plaintiff's fees, and the plaintiff can get nothing. So sometimes they come right away and want to talk to settle the case, which is good for both sides.
Right.
Others take a stubborn approach and say we're going to defend and take it past a proceeding where the judge rules if there's enough evidence, and if it's denied, they'll settle.
Can an individual, an employee, get justice in America today with some of these cases and other cases?
If you run into the reasonable employer, very easily, that approaches the system fairly. The problem is the Supreme Court's made the law so difficult, it's difficult for a responsible employer to figure out what case I should defend and what case I should settle.
And how is it made difficult?
There is a procedure known as motions for summary judgment that basically are supposed to be that if I sue you for falling out of my chair here in my office,
right,
you present the evidence you've done when you do your, what we call discovery, deposition testimony documents, and the judge looks at it and says you can prove everything you want. Murphy can't be liable for Stegall falling out of his own chair. Since 1986, federal judges, generally for conservative Republican presidents, appointed them. And this was never been like this before. The party didn't matter when I started. You got the judge, it didn't matter who appointed him. But now there's 90% correlation. As my associate, I didn't realize. He pointed out to me. Mm-hmm. If it's a Republican appointee and it's a close case, we're going to lose.
Yeah.
They won't let it see a jury. They decide what's reasonable, what a hostile work environment is.
And what do the appellate courts generally rule?
They're the ones that are the cause of it.
Yeah.
And the problem is that the Supreme Court is very strongly pro-jury.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't get a case to the Supreme Court till you get a Court of Appeals. There's 13 of them in the federal system.
To make a decision on it.
To actually rule on the issue,
yeah,
and create a conflict.
Right.
So Supreme Court looks at your question and they're going to say, well, we want to see what the other courts of appeal decide. Well, they won't decide it.
Well, we certainly hope you win this case. Veronica definitely deserves it, and I want to thank you very much for being on our program.
Thank you, Steve.
Thanks for joining us. You can get more information about our guest and the issues at insiderexclusive.com.